Guess what, gentlemen? As of today, this very day when we're recording this, Emily and I met exactly 15 years ago.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
Yet it seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
It does. I remember when we first met.
Yes, you and I were bantering back and forth, and I was making you laugh almost immediately.
I know. You even said I lost a point. How dare you?
Actually, you lost the point because you ordered the world's hugest breakfast. We were out for breakfast.
Rudy Trudy, fresh and fruity.
Or something like that. It was the biggest breakfast on the menu. And I'm like, my gosh, that's a lot of breakfast.
And I can eat whatever I want back then.
And not gain an ounce.
I know, right? I told you that.
And that's when I said, you've lost a point.
Yes, but I gained it back, I think.
Yes, you absolutely did gain it back. Yeah, but it was all in good fun. You were laughing. That's what flirting and banter is all about. And, you've been racking up points ever since anyway.
I have. It's been a wonderful and joyful and funny and happy life.
Would you say it's been a nice rack? Nice rack, by the way.
Well, after 2 kids, they've definitely came in.
Well, I'll tell you what, guys, humor is not only more important these days than ever before because of COVID and people being cranky and edgy. It's a superpower with women.
No kidding, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know that firsthand.
I do.
That's probably the only reason why you're still here after 15 years is I'm still making you laugh.
That among many other things.
Yeah, well, let's keep the main thing here, just for the purpose of this show. Guys, one of the most popular elements of my one-on-one coaching program is discovering and cultivating quick wit and other skills surrounding humor.
Well, you know what? I think the guys should hire you because you can teach them how to have humor and make women laugh, and it really is an attractive quality that draws us to you guys.
Oh, like I said, it's like a superpower. So guys, go ahead and go to mountaintoppodcast.com and click on the red button in the upper right-hand corner, and let's talk about building your superpowers with women.
Sounds good. Let's start today.
Yeah, right now. Don't wait another second. Well, maybe about another 40 minutes so they can listen to this show first.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, here comes my new friend, Peter McGraw, to talk about how to think yourself funny. See how this holds together? It's come full circle.
That's right. It does, doesn't it?
And here's to the next 15 years.
Mwah.
Here we go.
Live from the mist-enshrouded mountaintop fortress that is X and Y Communications headquarters, you're listening to the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. And now, here's your host, Scott McKay.
How's it going, gentlemen, all across the fruited plain and all over the world? Welcome again to another episode of the world-famous Mountaintop Podcast. My name is Scott McKay, at Scott McKay on Twitter and on Clubhouse. Real Scott McKay on Instagram. The website is mountaintoppodcast.com. You can find some interesting videos by searching Scott McKay on YouTube. And I also still invite you to join us at the Mountaintop Summit, the men's group on Facebook, where we all gather who are fans and participants of this show. And yeah, otherwise, if you're not a fan of this show, we still hope you'll join us because it's a good discussion regardless. On that rather humorous note, I'd like to welcome today's guest. His name is Dr. Peter McGraw. He's the director of the Humor Research Lab, aka HuRL, and professor of marketing and psychology at University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado. And he is the author of 2 very funny and important books called Shtick to Business. See what he did there? And The Humor Code. He's also the host of the Solo podcast. Peter McGraw, welcome, bud.
Thanks, Scott. It's great to be here. And I would say one of those books is funnier than the other.
Are you going to leave me hanging? Which one is?
Shtick to Business.
Well, we'll be sure to read that first. I figure we'll like you better that way, right? Indeed. All right. So this better be a humorous podcast with a name like Think Yourself Funny. But in all seriousness, at least for the short term, what is this idea of yours where we should think about being funny instead of simply trying to be funny? I mean, is it having to do with your brain being, your number one sex organ as opposed to other parts, or what's going on there?
It really came out of an idea, and actually a lot of the work that we've done in the Humor Research Lab that recognizes the risks of trying to be funny. And obviously we know the benefits of being funny in all walks of life, obviously in the world of dating and relationships most prominently. But one of the challenges of trying to be funny is just so that it's so hard to do. It's so difficult to do it. And sometimes even the most well-intentioned joke can fail, not in a yawn-worthy way, but in a way that really upsets people. And I've been, and I should know this as someone who studies comedy and someone who likes to perform it and tries to be funny in all walks of life. And so the idea behind thinking funny essentially is that a lot of the payoff comes from the creativity and the innovation that comes from the masters of comedy. That is, that they have these practices, they have these perspectives that help them think differently. And thinking differently often gets you ahead in life. Moreover, if you can understand what underlies going into comedy, the professionals, it can actually help you in your own personal and professional life to understand both the pitfalls, the opportunities, and then just better execution.
Yeah, you're kind of talking about building the comedic brain. And a couple of things come to mind there. First of all, anybody who has ever suffered through, and I'm using my words carefully, an open mic night, either indirectly or directly, by either trying to be funny up there on the stage with a mic in your hand or sitting in the audience and groaning through it. Talk about a great way to sell more alcoholic beverages at a comedy club. Boy, you're going to have to get yourself drunk just to suffer through it, right? Knows that comedy is hard. And I'm reminded of a famous old school comedian named Edmund Gwynn, I believe. But on his deathbed, he famously said, "Dying is easy. Comedy is hard."
Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe you can help fill in the blanks there. If not, I'll research it and put it in the show notes. But someone mentioned that line to me probably 20 years ago now. And I was like, wow, that's pretty hardcore. But it gets to what you're saying. If you're just trying to be funny without having really developed that psyche, that mentality that has almost reached this point of unconscious competence and knowing what funny looks like, then, you're almost doomed to failure. And I guess this is perhaps why the idea of being funny, making women laugh, right, is something that a whole lot of guys pressure themselves to do. Probably why we're going to get a whole lot of downloads on this particular episode.
Yeah, I bet.
But it's just so frustratingly esoteric to most guys of what it even means, because it seems so subjective instead of objective, right? Like, how do I do this? Is this something I learn? It just seems like all the guys I know who are naturally funny are so effortless about it, as if they were born with this, where, I would argue it really is kind of a learned skill. Tell me more.
Well, yeah, and certainly, and you used the S word there, subjective. And I think that's a great place to start if you're thinking about lessons. And that is, what is funny to one person is boring to another and is offensive to a third. And so when it comes to dating, let's say, it's not your job, it's not your goal to make every woman laugh. It's your goal to make the woman that you want to laugh. And in that way, you have a puzzle to solve. One is, do you perform in order to make her laugh, or do you reveal your authentic sense of humor in order to make her laugh? Now, I'm a big believer in knowing that you can't make everyone laugh. Your sense of humor is not going to work with everyone. I would rather use humor in some ways to figure out, is it a good fit? And that is that if a person's not laughing at my joke, maybe it suggests that we're not going to be the best of partners. But if that person is, well, that's a good indication. That said, there are still best practices that say maximize your chance of making the person you want to laugh while also being true to your authentic self and your beliefs and your perspectives and your style.
Yeah, no kidding, right? It seems like you can have a great sense of humor, but unless the woman you're trying to attract shares that, that quality of sense of humor with you, that type of sense of humor, it just won't be a love connection. Now, you mentioned the S word. That brings us to the F word. Right?
Yes, go on.
And that F word is, to me, fun.
Yes.
It's a 3-letter word, not a 4-letter word. That is the root word of funny. And I think a lot of times guys get so caught up in trying to be a comedian to impress women and make them hot for them that they forget that women will laugh hysterically just when they're having fun. I mean, think back to the schoolyard when you were 13 or 14 years old and you grabbed a pair and he walked up to a couple girls and started to talk to them, and they cover their mouth and look at each other and start laughing hilariously. Now, what did most of us normal red-blooded guys think in that moment? Oh my God, they're making fun of me. This is rejection. This is horrible. When in reality, they were so thrilled that a BOY was talking to them that they just erupted in giggles. And most
What's
boys
a
don't
BOY?
understand that. A BOY, like a boy.
Ah.
Yeah.
BOY. I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
You're thinking it's an acronym.
Yeah, I thought it was another acronym.
The boring other you. Right?
That's such a good point, to point out that I think that oftentimes when you are going to make someone laugh, you are taking a risk. And there is, at its root, comedy is about risk, and it's about threat, and it's about potential wrongness. It's that delightful response is when that wrong is actually not wrong, right? When that threat is actually harmless. And so I like that story and that belief, and we've all had that experience where we put ourselves on our edge and then get that delightful response, and how warm and welcoming that should be interpreted.
But you would agree most guys overthink this. If you just are a little warmer instead of colder and talk about lighter things instead of being so pesado, as they say in Mexican-American culture, so heavy, like you got this dark cloud over you. So many guys do that with women, trying to be so serious and trying to impress them with their stuff and their job and their science and, and women are thinking, I'm really bored. Can you just please help me have some fun? Like guys will write a woman online and say, so I see you're a nurse. How long have you been a nurse? It's like, oh God, she's got to break up the fun that's going on in her life to do this boring thing for this guy who wrote her. Whereas meanwhile, the guy who's going to succeed at getting her to write him back so fast he gets whiplash is going to say something like, oh, I see you're a nurse. I got to get a COVID shot pretty soon. How are you going to make me feel more comfortable about getting stuck in the arm by you? What's your big secret for that? She'll think that's funny because it's situational and there's something to talk about there. She'll go, oh, are you scared of getting a shot? Because I'm very good at comforting all my patients who get a shot. Right?
Yes.
And the guy may, and then the conversation goes from there. But see, it's a conversation she actually wants to be a part of. The fun aspect of the situation and the banter that goes along with it makes that more clickbaity than something that's just such a boring, lame, dull conversation. And there's not any real comedy there. It's just more fun.
Yeah, I would talk about the P word, which is a 4-letter word, which is play.
Yes.
And so comedy, humor really has its roots in play, this idea of playfulness. And I agree with you. I think too often, especially in a dating situation, we're trying to make a good impression. We have this goal. We want it to go well. And we kind of get into our head a little bit too much. And instead of like, oh, this should be fun. This should be playful. And I think a lot of comedy just comes out of that idea of playfulness, teasing, tussling with ideas. And trying to enjoy the moment. When someone feels like it is a formula, like you're pulling levers, now what am I going to do, this robotic kind of thing, why take a break from your busy day in order to have coffee with this person?
Now, see, the beauty of that is playfulness is wired into femininity. It's a feminine gift that women bestow upon us, that joy, that fun, that playfulness, that comfort. All of those things are feminine traits, and we as men provide, protect, preside in a way that makes women feel safe and comfortable. And when we act as a man, it makes us feel like a man, and it makes a woman feel like a woman. So assuming, which I do around here, bravely and without any remorse, that masculinity and femininity are the building blocks of sexual attraction and therefore horniness itself. When you're instigating a playful attitude in a woman, what you're doing is you're igniting that femininity. Guys often ask me what I mean by igniting femininity. There's a primo example, Peter, of how that ignition of femininity works. And what I think a lot of guys miss is when you succeed at doing that, she gets horny. She's already feeling sexual energy for you. And again, thinking about Marilyn Monroe, who famously said, if you can make a woman laugh, you can make her do anything. If you think about it, she didn't really date or get married to comedians. So someone was helping her have fun, even though they weren't professional comedy guys. So this is just a huge, huge thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is indeed. And I think also it's just such a great way to diffuse some of the tension around the sort of uncertainty and the seriousness of meeting someone for a first time. I actually came here from a lunch with a woman, a very attractive woman, in which the sort of pretense for the lunch wasn't exactly clear. We had been talking and so on. And at one point in time, I just looked at her and I said, "Is this a date?"
I saw that coming.
And she said, "I don't know, is it?" And I was like, "Well, I think you're the one who gets to decide."
Oh, no, the answer is yes, yes, yes. It's a date.
And then she goes, "Well, I guess we'll see." And I said, "Yeah, I guess we'll see when the check comes, if you pick up half of it or not." And she blushed at that moment. It was really fantastic. She like smiled, laughed, and blushed at that moment.
Usually it's the women who ask, "Is this a date?" And the answer, the correct answer, if you're in the throes of the date in the moment, is, "I'll decide after it's over."
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, and it was very fun. I mean, of course, I was going to pick up the check anyways, because I asked for the lunch, and that's what you do. But nonetheless, that little moment of playfulness diffused a lot of tension around what could have been an awkward interaction.
Yeah, and I bet she liked you even better because.
We'll see. I'll let you know.
Yes, we'll let you know. You will let me know if that was a date or not later. We'll have a follow-up for sure. Earlier, you mentioned this idea of yours that I love. I found out about your work and was intrigued by it. And in listening to you talk about your philosophy regarding humor, I learned very specific objective things. There's the O word, right? Very specific objective things about how to improve my funny. And these guys know I do the play-by-play announcing at my kids' BMX track. And it's a rather sizable audience. And I inject funny into the announcements. I give the kids cool nicknames. And people have come up to me and thanked me because everybody's taken everything so seriously nowadays. Mm-hmm. And everybody's so edgy and they're reading such negativity and everybody gets so doggone offended so easily nowadays, or so Twitter would want you to think. And I started incorporating a couple of the strategies, I guess is the best way to put it, although that's not a very funny way to put it. But indeed, strategies for how to be funnier. And man, excellent, excellent stuff. One of them you've already alluded to, which is this idea of benign violations. And you also have kind of elaborated upon that as wrongness that's okay. And man, that is so true. When we hear something and we say to ourselves, shaking our head, man, that's just wrong, but hilarious.
Mm-hmm. But we're laughing, yes.
Yeah, It's so powerful. And the idea also of self-deprecating humor, making fun of yourself a little bit instead of beating on other people all the time. As long as it's within reason and it doesn't sound, like you're too hard on yourself or sound like you really have a mental issue and we should call the suicide hotline.
Yeah, you don't want to be, you want to use self-deprecation in a way that actually reveals your strength rather than makes you seem pathetic. I do agree with you there.
Yeah.
Yes.
But tell us a little bit more about this idea of benign violations. And I think if I had to guess, I would think this goes along the same lines, perhaps as an enhancement to the foundational idea of ironic humor. In other words, the theater of the unexpected, that which you don't expect to come out of my mouth relative to a certain topic is exactly what you hear. And therefore, for some strange psychological reason, people laugh. So the wrongness is the opposite of the right way of doing things that we would expect. Therefore, it's all the more funny, right?
Yes, Scott, I'll go into the definition a tiny bit more, and I'll give you two sort of strategies that comics use to help create benign violations. We laugh at, we're amused by things that are wrong yet okay, things that are threatening yet safe, things that don't make sense yet make sense. And it's that sort of sweet spot of, you can imagine an overlapping Venn diagram of wrong yet okay. And that's part of the reason why it's so difficult to be funny, because you're hitting that little narrow slice. Explains the two ways that you can fail. You can be boring or you can be offensive. So it does suggest there's some risks at this. And in the case of dating, I actually think that if you're being your authentic self, there's very little risk, because what it just does is if your date is offended by what you're saying and yet it really is truly who you are, then that's probably not a good match for you. But the idea of irony, I think, is that unexpectedness often coincides with good comedy, because the things that are unexpected often have that sort of wrong, threatening kind of element to them. So I'll give you an example of kind of comedy 101. And I talk about it in Shtick to Business in chapter 1 called Reverse It. And that is that funny people, the masters of comedy in particular, they think in reverse, right? So when the whole world is going one way, they think in the opposite direction. So, for example, Chris Rock in his recent Netflix special, Tambourine, does a whole bit about how bullies are good. He uses this reversal, right? Everybody agrees that bullies are bad, and yet Chris Rock makes this impassioned argument for why bullies are good. That is that reversals are often a good way to make someone laugh, in part because they're not expecting it, and yet if you can create a reversal that works in the other direction, then you can be funny.
Kind of like reverse cowgirl.
That's well done.
Yeah,
that's a different play on words.
And it was wrong, but okay.
Yes, it was. It was, at least amongst this crowd.
Yes.
The other one is this rule of three, and my guess is that, Scott, you are an excellent purveyor of the rule of three.
Yeah, if you're doing reverse cowgirl, what's the other chick going to do?
And so I have this special contributor in my book. His name is Shane Moss. He's a very funny comedian, and he contributes to the book. And he has this great line where he says, I use the rule of three all the time. He says, first, I set up a premise. Second, I build an expectation. Third, I talk about my genitals.
Third, I tear it the heck down, right?
That's exactly right. So you basically, a lot of benign violations is, you're setting up some expectation, then you find a way to, as you say, tear it down, but you tear it down in a way that yet makes sense. And so I think that those are sort of, what I would encourage people who are listening to think about is, can I play around with reversals? And, reversals are just such a great way to experiment and to play with language and to play with situations in there, which, for example, I was doing a little bit with that interaction with that joke, which is that I might not pay the check. You know what I mean? I may not pick up the bill, so to speak.
Yeah, I may pick it up, but I'm not paying it. I'll pick it up and put it in front of you. That's the reversal, literally, right? The first thing that comes to mind are the old Dean Martin roasts. A whole series of comedic exploits, show after show after show. I mean, he must have done 36 of them. Mm-hmm. And, this is old school. This is like from the 70s. And of course, Dean Martin, one of the famous Rat Pack members, right, would always show up drunk for these things, which is wrong in and of itself, right? But somehow okay. And the whole premise is they would get a famous person, they would make them man or woman of the hour, and then just totally destroy them. Make fun of them, call them names, and talk about how terrible they are. And it was absolutely the theater of the benignly wrong. I mean, you wouldn't do something really horrible. I mean, you would start a fist fight with them or really get personal, although they kind of did, Hell, if you go watch some of these things, and they're all on Amazon Prime at the time we're recording this, by the way. Oh, my God. First of all, if it's the right one with the right dais full of old school comedians, you will not come up for air laughing. You will just keep dying laughing. And it's all the same joke over and over. It's, okay, here's the premise. I set it up. I tear it down over and over and over and over again. And, you just get the masters of comedy, and they each give like 2 or 3 minute sets. And some of these comedians made entire careers out of benign wrongness. Don Rickles was the master of insulting people.
Yes.
And, he passed on a couple years ago, and it was amazing how many famous people said of Don Rickles, he was the sweetest, kindest man I have ever known. He was just a treasure. And others, kind of piled on saying, well, he would have to have been given his shtick. And if you think about it, that wasn't funny. That was absolutely serious. You couldn't be Don Rickles and be that guy off stage. Phyllis Diller comes to mind. Her whole shtick was how ugly she is, right? Mm-hmm. And the list goes on of people who've just made careers out of being benignly wrong.
Yeah, in my first book, The Humor Code, we go to the Friars Club in New York City to actually investigate and understand this phenomenon, which I think is really fascinating. And I think those old Friars Club roasts are really incredible, in part because one of the things that people often overlook is the reaction of the person being roasted, so to speak. And that is they're often laughing and nodding and smiling.
Yes.
Which helps make it benign. The other one is those roasts really often come from a place of love. They're being roasted by their dear, dear friends.
That's right.
And in the case of Don Rickles, I think it's especially fascinating because one of the things that helped make Don Rickles was that he was equal opportunity.
Oh, for sure.
So what helped make those jabs sort of okay was that in some ways it was an honor to be roasted by Don Rickles because it meant you were important, you were worthy of being roasted. And so it came as like an endearment of us in a sense.
Yeah, he freely made fun of himself. I mean, one of the stories about Don Rickles is he had a hallway in his home in Beverly Hills or wherever it was, where he had portraits of all the famous comedians who had passed on, who were his idols. And there was an empty spot on the wall, and he would say to all his guests, yeah, here's where I go someday.
Oh, that's nice.
Right. And it's just funny because it's got that meta level quality of I'm my own idol, yet someday I'm going to kick the bucket and someone will put this picture up here on my behalf. And of course, the more you have to talk about it, the worse the joke gets, but you get the point.
Yeah, it shows that he doesn't take things too seriously, which I think gets back to the kind of theme that I think that we've been talking about is, yes, dating can feel very serious and meeting new people can feel very serious, but it works best when you take a non-serious approach to it.
Yeah, another guy who comes to mind is Rodney Dangerfield, who had this wonderful way of being self-deprecating. I mean, his whole gig was, I don't get any respect, I tell you, right? And this benign wrongness that's okay along with it. One of the jokes from Rodney that comes to mind is, my wife and I always have a cigarette after sex. About now, I've quit smoking for over 2 years, right? And everybody starts laughing. And then he goes, yeah, but my wife's up to 2 packs a day. Right?
Yeah, that's funny. It's a great tag.
Yes, exactly. And that's just so Rodney Dangerfield. It's self-deprecating right along with his persona and has that unexpected wrong twist to it, right? Mm-hmm. For sure. One of the things that has come to mind here is, we talked about how difficult this seems for so many guys. But really, I think we should sort of give ourselves a break, not only because of the idea that women will laugh simply when they're having fun, so you don't have to be a comedian, but the reality of it on top of that is, Peter, everybody thinks they have a sense of humor.
Yes.
If you polled everybody, like did a Quinnipiac poll or something and said, do you think you have a sense of humor? They'd all go, oh yeah, of course I do. Mm-hmm. But then it's remarkable how many people don't. And so many people, especially in today's political climate, they seem like they're looking to pick a fight and they're just looking for something to be offended by. And they go around offending each other. And that's not benign wrongness. That's just wrong, dude. Mm-hmm. It's just like, there's nothing fun or funny about it. These people are just twisted, yet they seem to be proliferating. So, perhaps part of the message here to these guys is, look, if you're even thinking about having a sense of humor, if you even see the importance of this, first of all, let's backtrack just a little. If you're going out with women who are easily offended, just say next. Good grief. I don't care how nice her ass is. If she's offended by everything, if she is the queen of political correctness and, oh my God, you're a horrible person because you said something crosswise or whatever. Within reason, of course, right? But there are a whole lot of easily offended women out there who guys are trying to appease. And of course, appeasement gets them nowhere. That just makes the women even more offended because they're not manning up and standing up for themselves, frankly. But man, if you're just thinking it might be a good idea to lighten up, I talk about warm levity and how few guys even think to be that way. Mm-hmm. You're already kind of ahead of the curve. You've almost got everybody else. You've almost lapped the field compared to everybody else if you're just thinking about the importance of all this, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I really become partial to, there's a Confucius saying, which is anger is like holding a hot coal in your hand and waiting to throw it at someone else. I think it doesn't do the average person much good to walk around easily offended and angry at the world. And again, let's get back to it. People date because they want to have fun. They want some release and some relief from the challenges and the seriousness of life. And they're trying to have a good time. And so I agree with you that when you don't feel like there's a match because you're on a different wavelength with regard to how you're seeing the world and your desire to enjoy life and to thrive and to be playful and to have fun, then I think, that is true. I say move on. I mean, I see this on the dating apps a lot. A lot of people are trying to protect themselves from being hurt by saying, no, I don't want this. No, I don't want this. No, 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 no. And I think, unfortunately, those people don't do themselves any favor. I want the person who has that improv style of yes, 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 yes. That's the kind of partner you want to play with. A date is really essentially a two-person improv game.
That's so true. That's an amazing intuitive insight right there. And that is yet another good reason why, once COVID isolationism is over with and we can actually go be social again, I would recommend to any guy, even if he's incredibly intimidated by it, to at least try improv once. I mean, not everybody there is going to be all that funny. I mean, that's the first thing you need to know. And by the way, as a little bit of a tangential aside, I would say if you've ever had on your bucket list something resembling doing open mic night at a club, just get a tight 1 minute of jokes that you have proven to make other people laugh with. And they'll probably make you go last because you're the FNG, right? And you're going to be amazed at how unfunny these other guys are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first time I did open mic, my wife just, elbowed me about 3 guys in and said, you got this. You're going to bring the house down. The problem is the audience that's remaining by the time I got up there was so surly. It was almost like a scene from the Blues Brothers where I needed chicken wire in front of me.
Yeah, that's
hard
true.
to bring back, And yet the humor is hard, but what it does is it gets you to realize maybe I'm not as bad at this as I thought I would be, because any little bit of humor is going to be way ahead of what anybody's doing, right? So you're talking about being a single man. And indeed, the podcast you host is called the Solo Podcast, which is about celebrating being happily single. Mm-hmm. So this idea of incorporating humor into your interactions with women and a lot of new women you might meet. You talked about having met one and gone out on a date with her for the first time today, this very day we're recording this. So you've had lots of practice. You get lots of reps, as it were, with being an attractive man by virtue of humor. Now, I will go ahead and be a bit deductive here and say that I have always understood attractive humor not to be something tied to being the class clown or a big dork or being silly, although I will make allowance for how single moms and single dads can laugh till they snort Diet Coke out of their nose over dad jokes. That is something some of the younger folks kind of roll their eyes about.
Yes.
But it works for that milieu of people. But I've always thought of quick wit, coming up with ironic quips in a smooth, witty fashion, of course, shows personal power, mental flexibility, confidence, the ability to adapt and make plans on the fly in a way that just turns women on. And I know you have some depth you'd like to offer to that conversation about attractive humor. So go ahead and let the fur fly. I'd love to hear it.
No, well, I don't disagree with you. And the reason that I don't disagree with you is that the little research that's been done on the value of a sense of humor suggests that at the very least, we know that intelligence is a good predictor of one's ability to be funny. And we know that people are looking for smart partners. And, so like all things equal, you want someone smarter than dumber. And so in that way, that quick-wittedness that you're describing is a show, don't tell, right? You're showing someone that you're smart. You're not telling someone that you're smart. It's better to tell them a joke and have them laugh than it is to tell them where you went to school. And so I think in that way, it's important. The second one is, and I think this is incredibly important, is, again, all things equal, it's just nice to spend time with funny people, because what funny people can help you do is help you cope with the tragedies in the world. That is, that funny people can turn tragedy into comedy. And now you're experiencing more positive emotion than you would otherwise. And also, when someone's able to joke about and make fun of the bad things in the world, it actually changes the way we see those things. We see those things as less threatening, as less bad. And so a partner who can turn violations into benign violations, as I like to say, is a great partner. And how do you figure out someone's able to turn violations into benign violations is for them to do it on a regular basis. And so that's why I do agree with you. We should lean into our own sort of form of comedy and just use that in some ways as a bellwether of whether this is going to be a potentially good relationship or not. whether it's a good match.
And if you think about it, if you're looking for a silver lining to the whole COVID thing and the political melee we've been through over the past year, especially here in the United States and indeed globally, there's never been an easier time to be warm and light because nobody's doing it. I mean, you have a starving crowd of pretty women out there who would just love to be lightened up. I think that's an excellent point. One final note I would like to add, kind of as a finishing talking point here, is it just came to mind that one of the big failures of comedians is the attempt to be funny, to be impressive. Because I want your approval.
Yes.
I'm being funny so that you'll love me. And I think a lot of guys could find it very easy to deviate down that path, especially if they have a history of being needy, clingy, an approval seeker, etc. with women. And you'll notice that when people attempt that kind of humor, it has a strange psychological effect. When people know you're trying to be funny for your own personal gain or because you need attention, they will literally withhold humor from you. They will stifle laughter until their lips bleed, trying not to laugh at you if they think that they're somehow surrendering a laugh for your personal need. Meanwhile, the guys who are the absolute funniest, you just know, you sense that, again, here's another word you like to use, that authenticity, that they just want you to smile. You know, I have a word for all the feminists out there. I'm not going to tell you to smile. Feminists hate when men do that, right? Allegedly. I'm not going to tell you to smile. I'm going to make you smile.
That's a nice way to think of it.
Yeah. And everywhere I go, the example I want to set for my son, I mean, I do it when he's with me, and indeed for guys I work with, is I want to do what I can to make a woman feel welcome, to make her feel safe, and to help her lighten up. And indeed, you know, for all the bad press asking women to smile gets from feminists, boy, do women just light up a room. They're so radiant when they're smiling. It's such a beautiful representation of female beauty. And if we love women and we love making women happy and we love to ignite that femininity in them, and women sense that this is a benevolent, how about benevolent wrongness? Right?
That's fun.
If they sense this benevolent wrongness, they'll freely laugh, and an audience will freely laugh. We talk about Rodney Dangerfield and his self-deprecation. I think of Gabriel Iglesias, the fluffy guy, and his self-deprecation and how silly he is and how he just doesn't seem like he cares. He just wants you to have a good time and share in his good time. Oh, and the audience is just howl and laughter because they feel so free because they're not feeding his ego. They're enjoying a good time along with. And I think that's a great way for guys to think about that. And I just thought I'd throw that in.
If I may, I want to build on that idea because I think it's a powerful idea. In the world of comedy, there is a belief among the pros, which seems wrong at first blush, which is they say, I don't care what the audience thinks. And that's there to remind them to not pander to the audience because people know when they're being pandered to and they don't like it. And I think you're absolutely right with that. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. I think it's Frank Zappa, who was talking about, you know, after he dies, he says, I don't give a fuck if you remember me. And it's like, you know, that guy's rock and roll. You know what I mean? Like, he's not pandering to the world. In the Solo podcast, the tagline, the subtitle is The Single Person's Guide to a Remarkable Life. And I think that when you are leaning into life and you're living remarkably and you're delighting in the wonders of and the opportunities of our single time on this planet, it actually has the ironic benefit of making you incredibly appealing as a potential partner. And no one wants to date someone they feel sorry for.
Isn't that the truth?
Right? They want to date someone who is living a remarkable life and is having a playful approach to the world, is going to turn the violations into benign violations. And so I think what you're talking about is 100% right on.
Yeah. A woman cannot be your mommy and your lover at the same time. Can happen.
Absolutely. I know so many divorced men who fell into that trap. They let themselves be parented by their partner, and then their partner says, why do I don't need a third child. I completely agree.
Hence the divorce. You know, you were talking about Frank Zappa and him saying, you know, I don't care what you think of me. It reminded me instantly of a band whose most of their creative work was in the 90s called Primus. And at their own concerts, they would sell black t-shirts with big white block letters on them that say Primus sucks.
Talk about irony.
Yeah, right. And these days, most people know Primus. They may either realize this or not, but the band's work by being the purveyors of the theme song from South Park. Lots of weird bass notes and stuff like that. But they've always had that quirk to them. And, of course, people would wear the shirts around that say Primus sucks, thinking the person wearing the shirt thinks Primus sucks. Mm-hmm. And everybody would go search out this band that sucks so bad to see if the shirt was correct or not, right? Mm-hmm. But, again, ironic humor all the way around.
And that's a great reversal.
Yes, 100%. Hence, we bring... in true reversal fashion, we go from 180 to 360 and bring the conversation full circle, right? Okay. His name is Peter McGraw, Dr. Peter McGraw, if you will. He is the director of the Humor Research Lab, aka HuRL, professor of marketing and psychology at University of Colorado at Boulder. And he talks about thinking yourself funny, which is the title of this show. You can find his book, Shtick to Business, by going to a special URL that I've set up for you. And we've already figured out long ago that this is well worth reading. www.mountaintoppodcast.com/McGraw. We'll go with something easy to spell like McGraw, McGraw. Shtick could either have a C in it or not, but it doesn't. It only has, two C's, right? It only has one C in the version you use. But if you go to mountaintoppodcast.com/McGraw, you will indeed be transferred over immediately, telemagically, if you will, to Amazon.com, and you will be able to grab a copy of his book. I also will put both Shtick to Business and the Humor Code up on my Amazon influencer page at the head of the queue for you, so you can grab a copy of both. There are also lots of books from other guests I've had on, so if you're looking for some reading material, you need go no further than mountaintoppodcast.com/Amazon. And of course, I want to definitely recommend to you single guys out there that you listen to the solo podcast that Peter McGraw hosts. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Peter McGraw, what a great and essential and different conversation, one that we've really never had on this show before. Thank you so much for dropping by. I was greatly looking forward to this show, and it certainly didn't disappoint. Thank you, man.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I'm glad that your listeners are book readers, because reading books is a cheat code to life.
Yeah. Doesn't necessarily sound funny, but of course it can be, right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And gentlemen, if you have not been to mountaintoppodcast.com in a while, definitely go there. You can talk to me for free for 25 minutes about what's on your mind. It can be anything at all. But most guys who talk to me for 25 minutes are all about going from good to great in their dating lives, getting the woman of their dreams in their life finally, especially after a year like 2020. A lot of us feel beaten down. Hey, let's lift you up. Let's go from being pesado to being warm and light so you can pass that on to a great woman in your life and make her attracted for you. All that and more is there for you at mountaintoppodcast.com. And while you're there, please visit the good folks at Heroes Soap and Origin in Maine. Listen, both of those companies who sponsor this podcast do so because they're all about better men in terms of hygiene, in terms of health, in terms of style, and in terms of looking your best and feeling your best. So if you choose to partake of the fine products at either Origin in Maine or Heroes Soap, please use the coupon code MOUNTAIN10 to let them know that we sent you there and also get 10% off on your order. And with that, until the next episode, this is Scott McKay from X&Y Communications in San Antonio, Texas. Be good out there.
The Mountaintop Podcast is produced by X&Y Communications. All rights reserved worldwide. Be sure to visit www.mountaintoppodcast.com for show notes. And while you're there, sign up for the free X&Y Communications newsletter for men. This is Ed Roy Odom speaking for the Mountaintop Podcast.